Rabbi Clapper, you're muted.
You let him try to set up Zoom by himself?
Well, I'm not at Shul, so there's not much I can do about it. Do we have? No. Rabbi Clapper, you're muted.
I was muted. No one. He hasn't been honest.
Oh.
And but for 5 minutes, I've tried.
You can try calling his cell phone.
Fine.
No one's actually there. Okay. It's all tape recordings listening. Thank you, Deborah. Okay, take two. Okay, so I'm gonna skip the introduction I had and we're gonna go straight to it. Right? We proved a while back that there's a dialogue between Rav Kahana and Rav in which Rav Kahana justifies his killing of an informer by saying that Jews are like a so michmar, like an animal caught in a trap. But it was still an odd, right? Even though we explained that the trap is the tax legislation and the animals are everyone else who ceases to have mercy on them. So once you're trapped, you get harmed. It still seems an odd metaphor. So I want to take you, if you turn the page to page 2 on the source sheet, I wanted to discuss why it might be that Rav Kahana is presented as explaining that the Jews who are informed on are like caught in a trap. So here we go. The beginning, at the top of page 2, we have there's a discussion about what sorts of wildlife are subject to the laws of kilayim. Right, you have behemot and chayot to start with, right, domestic and undomesticated animals, and then you have birds and you have fish, and you can possibly distinguish between fish and maritime animals. Right, so there's a statement by Rish Lakish, which says v'chein chaya v'of kayotze ben, that just like kilayim applies to behemos, it applies to chaya and of. Rabbi Yochanan gives an explanation of that, and then we get Rabbi Yirmiyah says the following. Right in the middle of the source, Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar, Kahana sha'al Rish Lakish, Rabbiya b'chayos hayam mahu. Okay, so if you create interspecies coupling among the animals that live in the fish, that live in the sea, is that a violation of kilayim or not? So Amalei Odeng Siba Hen Liminehen. So the answer was, there's a pasuk that says Liminehen. So if you have things that are called minim among them, then why can't you have cross calibration, right, across minim? Fine. Rav Acha Lamar Kain, Rav Acha has the story differently. Right, so Rav Acha has a positive statement that Rish Lakish makes that anything about which the Torah describes as having various meaning can be subject to the prohibition against crossbreeding. Hey, Sif Kahana. So Rav Kahana says, hang on a sec. Do you really mean to say that that kilayim can apply to chayos hayam? On this, Amar Rabbi Yossi ber Bibon, hacha paras kahana mitsudase al Reish Lakish nitzadye. Here, Rav Kahana spread his trap over Reish Lakish and captured him. Okay, so right, we have one association of Rav Kahana with traps, intellectual traps. Okay, now go to Shabbos Daf Chaf Dalet. The Av Rav Savrlad Hadarava, right? Rav held this the question of Rav. We're dealing with the question of muksa and what is muksa to move a shovel unnecessarily. So we have a whole discussion about that, at which the Gemara quotes a position about that, and it says, "Eini." But Rav Kahana equal to Rav. Rav Kahana came to the house of Rav. The Amar. Now we have Rav Kahana and Rav. The Amar. Aisule shusa lekahana lesivale. Now, in the context of muksa, right, they say, bring this thing to Kahana, which would otherwise be muksa, and let him sit on it. Anyone want to guess what a shusa is? A shusa is a trap. Okay, so we have Rav Kahana as an intellectual trapper, and when Rav Kahana, and when he shows up at Rav's house, now do you normally sit on lobster traps? It's usually very dangerous to sit in lobster traps. Whatever other kind of trap you are, the whole point of traps is you're not supposed to get out of them. Once you sit down on them, Rav Kahana shows up in front of Rav, his person bring the trap for Rav Kahana to sit in. So we have an association of Rav Kahana with traps generally. We have
three different words for traps.
And we do. We have three different words for traps. So you will look at me and say, there could be different kinds of traps, right? So, right. So, and there's no, right? You know, all you're doing this is just basing it on the word michmar, right? Which it's true. Rashi translates michmar as mitsuda, I think, and it's true that mitsudas are things you catch fish in, right? And we could all do that, but it would be really much more compelling if we could show that there was some kind of connection between these sugyot and that kind of sugya and that sugya, although we have grounds for a small suspicion that the word traps thrown Rav Kahana is a suspicious word. Okay, so when we began the sugya, one of the things that really puzzled me was, what is this story doing in the middle of a bunch of perfectly conventional stories about most fruit? Right, the whole sugya is right. So now, if we go back to page 1, at the very top, we will take a look at the first story just before the story of Rav Kahana and Rav. The first story just before the story of Rav Kahana and Rav begins, Ahu Shusa. The immediately previous story is a fight about a trap. Two people fighting about a trap. So the word Shusa shows up just in the story just before Rav Kahana, which is probably why the story about the Michmar shows here. Rav Kahana is associated with traps. At the end of the story, at the end of it, I still don't know what it means in the other version of this story on page 2, which is the Cheses Rabbah. If you look at the Cheses Rabbah, you'll see that it really begins with Reish Lakish setting a trap for Rav Kahana. Bada Paras ben Lakish mitzudasa lekahana. Right, where Kahana asks Reish Lakish, what about kilayim among chayos hayam? And Reish Lakish says, it says l'minahem. And Bada Paras ben Lakish mitzudasa lekahana. Okay, so I got it right. So Reish Lakish trapped Rav Kahana, but then Rav Kahana says, hang on a second, it also says minahem by fish. How is one marbi a fish? So Baha Paras Kahana mitzudasa ben Lakish, right? So this is one of the cases where really it's Reish Lakish setting a trap for Rav Kahana, and Rav Kahana, right, he ends up being hoisted by his own petard. He ends up being trapped. So you get this idea that life around Rav Kahana is a constant battle, right? Everyone's setting traps for everyone else.
Right. I mean, also is described as a lion and a fox. Aren't those animals that were used as traps?
Could be. I don't know enough about that. Could be. We hunt foxes.
And I think there's something with like torches on foxes too.
Shimshon is the fourth section.
I think he had stuff with the
If you can connect it, Shimshon beats up, kills the lion and finds the honey, finds the thing in it, right? And he sets the foxes. So you can find the connection between Rav Kahana and Shimshon, that would be awesome. I don't know what it is. So I can't tell you more than this. All I can tell you is that we started off with this weird thing about a trap, and now we've
Kind of should look like that.
okay. I don't know. I just put it as a methodological issue. It seems highly suspicious to me at this point, right? That the dialogue between Rav Kahana involves a trap. That there's some kind of intellectual combat going on everywhere around Rav Kahana seems to me to be compelling. Right now we understand the trap. We maybe understand the snake. It might be that we could eventually get to understand the whole story. Okay, so but today we're going to try and talk about the third part of the story. So so we're going back to page 1 at the last paragraph. So this is right after the snake has opened and Rabbi Yochanan has now entered the me'ara in which Rav Kahana is found. And we have two different versions. Okay, there's one version in which Rabbi Yochanan says to Rav Kahana, if I had known that you weren't really trying to make fun of me, I would not have gotten angry. I would not have gotten depressed, and therefore you would not be dead. Okay. And then he says, well, okay, so now it's fine. Why don't you come with me? And Rav Kahana says something highly ambiguous. He says, if you can pray that I not die further, then I will go, and if not, not. And the hour has passed. No one knows what that word means. And then Rabbi Yochanan says something else no one knows what it means, right? In the two versions, what changes are, so in one version there's no apology. But the thing that really matters to me, right? There are two changes that really matter to me. One is that there's a version in which Rabbi Yochanan asks all his questions all his kashas to Rav Kahana before he considers taking him out of the cave. In the other version, he has already suggested that he come with him before he asks Rav Kahana before he asks Rav Kahana his questions. So does Rav Kahana ask the question while he is still presumptively dead, or does Rav Kahana ask his questions when there's already a clear possibility of being alive? The second thing is that there's one version in which what he's asked are to resolve sfeikot, another version in which Rabbi Yochanan asks kashas to Rav Kahana. And resolving all your sfeikot is relating to somebody in one kind of way, right? His halachic authority. Asking him kushiyot is relating to him another kind of way. Although in each case, I think that Rav Yochanan is clearly the student and Rav Kahana is the Rebbe. Right, once you're in the Merah, but they're different kind of relationships. Then we have this peculiar line, Dilachon Amrei Dilachon. So I want to take you through three options. We have the textual options, whether the questions are asked before and after, whether they are halachic questions or attack questions. Let's take you through how Rashi offers multiple presentations of each of these elements, and I think that Rashi offers two options, and I think there's a third option in each case. And I want to take you through those elements. Here's what Rashi says on the beginning, right? So Rashi says, "V'hainu de Amri Rabbi Yochanan dilachon." Rashi equals shelachem Amri. So Rashi says, what does that mean? Hayiti Omer Torah. Hayiti Omer Torah shel bnei Eretz Yisrael hi dilachon hi shel bnei Bavel. Right. So Rashi's first way of reading Rashi, really the only way Rashi has of reading the story here. Sorry, it's for Rabbi Yochanan is the other way. Rashi says that the end of the story is Rabbi Yochanan completely conceding to the domination of Bavel. Right, Rabbi Yochanan says to all his students, all the stuff I used to tell you, that stuff, right? That's right. That Hayiti Omer Torah shel Eretz. I used to say it was dilachon. I used to say it belonged to you, right? Dilachon Amrin, that which I used to say was yours. Dilachon is really bnei Bavel because Rav Kahana vanquished me, and now, right, Eretz Yisrael is a intellectual vassal of Bavel. Okay, now if that's the story, if that's the end of the story, then probably we have to read the whole story in that light, right? The whole story is about Rav Kahana's conquest of Eretz Yisrael from Bavel. Okay, is that really the most likely pshat in what Rav Yochanan says? So Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Mem Dal, is having a discussion about who says that the minhag of Aravos on Hoshana Rabbah is Yesod Nevi'im. And it says right on page 3, the Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Arava Yesod Nevi'im Tisayim, right? So Rabbi Avo said, and Rabbi Yochanan says they see Nevi'im Tisayim, let's grant it. Rabbi Zeres says to Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Yochanan said that Arava was a minhag Nevi'im, but Rabbi Yochanan said the name of Rabbi Nechunya Ish Bikas Beis Chorasan, Esther Natios Arava, V'nisu Chamayim Halacha L'Moshe Misinai. So how can Rabbi Yochanan be the one who said it was Yesod Nevi'im? It's Halacha L'Moshe Misinai. Can't be. So he has the answer that we always give when we have that problem. We say Shachum B'Chazrum V'Yistum. It's Halacha L'Moshe Misinai, which was forgotten and then recreated by the Nevi'im. Okay, now this obviously, if Rabbi Yochanan had known the Rambam said that Halacha L'Moshe Misinai is, there can't be a machloked about, so they really can't be forgotten, Rabbi Yochanan would never have said this, but Rabbi Yochanan hadn't seen the Rambam. So it's perfectly plausible for him to say something like this, and then it's left to the Rambam to try and figure out how to read Rabbi Yochanan, which is much harder. Okay, but however, we're going to reconcile this. There was some group that remembered it, but it wasn't popular, and then then it was resurrected, whatever you want, right? So we've reconciled it. I think Gemara says, Umiyam Rabbi Yochanan Hachi. Rabbi Yochanan really say, well, we don't know which one. Rabbi Yochanan really say Yesod Nevi'im, or Rabbi Yochanan really say Shachum v'Chazrum v'Yistum. We don't know which line it applies to. Ve'Amar Rabbi Yochanan Dilachon Amri Dilahonhi. What I said was yours is really theirs. So you'll understand, I think, immediately that what? The question is, did Rabbi Yochanan really say that Arava is Yesod Nevi'im? Or maybe did Rabbi Yochanan really say that Arava is a Halacha L'Moshe Misinai, which was forgotten and then reinstated by the Nevi'im? What on earth does that have to do with Rav Kahana's conquest of Eretz Yisrael? And yet, Pashtus this is the same statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so Rashi is up for the challenge. Here's what Rashi says. Rav Kahana have me tell me Rav. Rav Kahana was a student of Rav. Rav Charif Ma'od, and he was very sharp. Uvarach Eretz Yisrael lifnei Rabbi Yochanan machmas mardin. He ran away to Rabbi Yochanan because he had killed somebody. Sharagod amechad, because he killed somebody, as we learn in the last parak of Avakam. V'hutzrach lo Rabbi Yochanan lekamas fekos. And Rabbi Yochanan had a lot of doubts that he needed Rabbi Kahana for. Vayomer Rav Kahana libnei Eretz Yisrael. And Rabbi Yochanan libnei Eretz Yisrael. Yochanan used to say to Eretz Yisrael, Savura yiti shetorah shalachem. I used to think the Torah was yours. Because you, Bnei Eretz Yisrael, I thought had never suffered an exile, and therefore, right in your halachic tradition, post the Golet Bavel, and therefore I thought that you were superior to Bnei Bavel. But now I have seen that the Torah really belongs to Babylonia. The Babylonian Jewry preserved the wisdom that went into exile with Yechaniah Melech Yehuda. We have the detour to tell you what was the Jewry. From which we derive that Rabbi Yochanan, because he thought Babylonia had a continuous tradition from the Galut Yechaniah, therefore he must believe that it wasn't forgotten. And therefore he cannot believe Shachum v'Chazrum v'Yistum. That was a very elaborate explanation of how you got to, right? That's like, what? That's like, if you have a predetermined position as to what the words mean, that might be the best you can do. But it's a long way with nothing. Rabbi Yochanan believed that nothing was ever forgotten in Bavel, despite all the Gemaras of people forgetting things in Bavel. Mm-hmm. Really, really, really unlikely. Okay, so the Rashba says, Hainu dam Rabbi Yochanan dilachon amri dilahonu. Pirish ben Chanazal, Rav Kahana, Shehu Shalachem Shumi Bavel, Amarle, Tilhonhi, Perish Midrabananhu. Rabbi Yochanan Kach Beherag Lulavarova. So the Rashba back in the Makama says what it means is not dilachon, it's a girsa issue, right? Dilachon means which belong to you. Dilachon is one who was among you, I think. Actually, no, is this still dilachon? It's probably still dilachon, right? One who was yours. Yeah, sorry, he still has dilachon. One who was yours said that this is theirs, meaning this is the rabbis. Meaning that Rav Kahana once upon a time said that something was the Rabbanan. Now, what's the Rashba saying? The Rashba is saying, I don't know what it means here, but a comment in our story. But I have a Gemara over there where Rabbi Yochanan says this, and he says this in order to defend the position that it's Yesod Nevi'im. Now, Yesod Nevi'im is not quite the same thing as Draban, but it's close. So let's take what the most likely shot there in Sukkah is, which I think is that Dilachon Amri, your guy Rav Kahana, said that Dilachon, that this halacha is the Rabbanan. Now, if that's the case, Hainu Damar Rabbi Yochanan at the end of our Sugya means nothing at all. It's completely irrelevant to the story. So Rashi has something that is a beautiful capstone, perhaps, to the story, but that has no conceivable, and no plausible meaning in the Sugya and Sukkah. The Rashba has something that is barely plausible in Sukkah, and is, if you just wanted to quote a statement of Rabbi Yochanan Rav Kana at the end of the Sugya about Rabbi Yochanan Rav Kana, you could quote this statement. Okay, that's it. Now you could say that that maybe the statement is repurposed. Right? Sometimes the statement, right? Sometimes the fun of the Galata is you take a perfectly innocent statement from one place and you use the same words to mean something else in the context of your Galata. So, for example, Harei ani kiven shivim shana. Harei ani kiven shivim shana pretty clearly means I'm around 70. But in the Galata of Yochanan Zakkai, it means a miracle happened to me, and I grew 10 rows of white hairs overnight. And I think in that sugya there are a lot of things like that, where you take lines that look perfectly, that in context didn't mean anything unusual, and there are times when a Gadatas have, one of my favorite Gadatas is the Gadata of Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right, where the amazing thing, right, where Yishmael ben Elisha blesses God. It says that, right, and he sings him the marvelous Avraham Fried song, right? Right? I think it had that niggin because I think it is so plainly original to the words. It's incredible. It's an incredible tune. Do you all know it? No. All right, perhaps I will, do a performance of it at some point. Although we don't have a Shabbos anymore, or I could listen to Avraham Fried, who does it really well.
Ukulele concert anyway.
You know, with ukulele, that's right. I don't think this is. I don't really know what ukulele is, but it's not a country western song. I have my doubts.
As long as it only needs 4 chords.
Okay, I just thought it was the right music for it. In any case, so by the end of that sugya, right, after you have this incredible, the dialogue in heaven, God, right, Yishmael ben Elisha is going into the Kodesh Kodashim, and he sees God sitting on his throne, and God, right, and God says to him, "Bless me." And Yishmael ben Elisha says, "May your mercy overcome your thing." I think where his conclusion is, I'll take birkat hedyot kala beinecha. We learn from here that you shouldn't take the bracha of an ordinary person lightly. Which is because if God cared about Yishmael ben Elisha's bracha, which is a wonderful, wonderful moral to draw, but so unrelated to the story. Right, the story is not about whether you should accept the bracha. The story is about what God wants and all sorts of things like that. But it's an amazing. I think it's intended not as comic relief, but as emotional relief. Right, you spend all your time, right? That your time is up in Shemayim. You need to come down to earth somehow at the end of the shir. Right, so I'll take birkat hedyot kala beinecha. Everyone has relieved to take a breath, and then we can go tomorrow. I think that's probably how it functioned. So it could be that Dilachon Amr Dilhon, who is that kind of is that there's a genre in which you end, and everyone knows it, right? If you're giving that kind of genre, right, that everyone knows that the shir ends, right, when you end with the popular phrase. Okay, right, may know, right, that if Rav Lichtenstein's shirim or Friday night shirim were all organized around, right, you were waiting for the quote, because there had to be a quote from English literature somewhere in the middle, and you could watch people open and close their break, because you knew there was going to be a certain amount of repetition before, a certain amount of repetition after, but to get the shir, you had to hear the beginning and the quote and the end. And you could watch, as I once was in the back of these matters, you could watch the experienced Kush guys open and close their sfarim as you got to the right point in the shir.
My experience.
I don't know about that. I don't care about that half, but but you did have to listen for the quote. Right? That was very important. And other guys, in Wilson's shirim in Israel, you have to wait for the giant gematria. Right there, Shurim have climaxes, and right. I think it's possible that this is like a planned anticlimax at the end. So that would let you deal with the Rashba shot. The Sefer Yasher ben Tam says, so Rav Kahana asks, Rabbi Yochanan asks Rav Kahana everything that is in doubt to him, and Rav Kahana teaches it to him. So that seems to me to be the most likely shot, which is that Rabbi Yochanan says the things I have been teaching you are really from Rav Kahana. Don't think it's me. This is actually just stuff I learned from Rav Kahana in the Me'ara. And Rabbi Yochanan used to say this at the end of the Shurim, but that doesn't really fit well in Sukkot. Right, so you have three possibilities. One possibility is that it's just saying Rav Kahana said it's the Rabbanan, which works really well in context in Sukkah, but not so well linguistically and not at all in Bava Kama. You have the claim that it means that Torah has gone up from Bavel to Bavel has conquered Eretz Yisrael, which fits in very nicely with the Ari Allah, right? With the Ari Allah mi Bavel, but doesn't seem to have anything to do with the Sugi and Sukkah, despite Rashi's best efforts. And then we have what I think is the most likely thing in context, which is that it means that Rav Kahana afterwards would quote things, and Rav Yochanan would quote things named Rav Kahana, but that doesn't fit so well in Sukkah either. Okay, those are options in the first half of the Sukkah. Okay, what about the line before that? So we don't know, because we can say, you know what? Again, we have two structures that can appeal to. One structure that appeals to us is that the Sugya has one theme all the way through, and the last line of the Sugya is supposed to capture that theme. And if you read it like Rashi, that is a very attractive reading. The other possibility is that the last line is irrelevant to the theme. I would rather that it would be irrelevant in some way, which is at least related as opposed to, right? So I prefer Rabbi Tam's shot to the Rashba. Okay. What about the previous line? When Rav Yochanan is trying to talk Rav Kahana into coming out. So Rashi says as follows. So since the hour has passed and a miracle has occurred, Chalif below Elech Odima. So Rashi says, Rav Kahana says, I will not go with you anymore. Shematich Osalai V'amus Od Pam Acheret. I'm not going. Rabbi Yochanan says, come with me back to the base medrash. All is well. I guess I am all forgiven, because now I realize really in this dialogue, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't come across so well, because he meets Rav Kahana in the grave where he put him, and says, "Oh, I didn't realize you weren't really insulting me. Everything's fine now. You can come back to the base medrash. You would like. I'm sorry. It seems like an elementary thing. That was my fault. I should not have assumed that you were making fun of me. Totally non-existent. It kind of messes up the notion that Rabbi Yochanan has actually reached the conclusion that he is Rav Kahana's student.
Right.
Okay. Ella, what Rav Kahana says in this version is Ella elech leveiti chai. I will go home. And I will no longer learn with you, because if I learn with you, the odds are that you will kill me again. Okay. Now, the question is, where does Rav Kahana go? Right, that's a fair question, right? He says, I'm going to go home to my house. Okay. We hadn't previously learned he had a house. Right? Where did he come from? He came from Rav, where he killed somebody else. Right? So the notion that Rav Kahana all of a sudden has developed a desire for a quiet suburban life. Right, he's going to retire to Sharon, Massachusetts. Right, I'm just going to go there. None of these political hubbubs of the big yeshivas for me. So that's a little bit of a weakness, and also it's kind of like anticlimactic. Right? I mean, you can read into the words. Rav Yochanan says, "Come with me," and Rav Kahana says, "Well, you know what? There was a miracle, and now that time has passed, and therefore, if you can pray for it's a very long-winded way of saying no. Maybe you want to. Maybe you're afraid he's going to kill you again if you say it otherwise. We have stories, right? It's not an uncommon genre where somebody says, "Please come with me," and you say, "No, I won't do it." And it makes the story somewhat parallel to Reb Zera and Rava and the Purim story, which is, I suspect, what is in the mind of the person who reads it this way. Right? There was a miracle, right? Miracles don't happen all the time, right? So that's what's happening here. I think is that this story is being read against the story of the murder on Purim. The Easton Mefarish, but there is this amazing reading. The Easton Mefarish, Hoel v'chalif shata v'kibalti tsar misa. Since the hour has passed and I have experienced the pain of death, Lo akabel od pam acheret lelech mikan. I am no longer willing to leave the grave. So that's like, all of a sudden, like, the story has gotten like deep into dark existentialist. Right? All of a sudden we're in Camus territory. All right. There's no reason to go through the absurdity of life again. Life just leads to death. Why not stay in the grave? Why start quoting Koheles? So that's, that's very nice. It fits the words also. But what is the story about then? What kind of ending of the story is that where God decides he prefers death? Is really now. This then turns into a machloket because Rav Kana does show up in other stories, and so there's a whole debate. So first of all, right? So I gave you the Ran. I gave you the Ran here who the Ran here who says that there are two kahanas. Wikipedia following Rav Aaron Hyman is up to 10, I believe. But there are lots of kahanas, and not only there are three kahanas. There are three kahanas who are famous, and two of them both have relationships with Rav. They're right, and really the only evidence for that is the Gemara in Menachos, where it says when Rav Kana came, he came from Bavel to Israel. He found Bnei Chia. So when did that story happen? In our story, he comes and he finds Rish Lakish. So it must have happened twice, but twice is really implausible. Therefore, it must be two Rav Kanas. No, he came to Israel. He went there, then he went there. What's the big deal? Right? You can have like maybe he took a tour of the yeshivot, and this is what happened in this yeshiva, and that's what happened in that yeshiva. I read Wikipedia, which I usually have great faith in, and I just said, but like, why are they so sure they're two kanas? Okay, there's a Ran that says they're two kanas, but and I looked to discover that this was not. He gave his source as Hyman, but then I looked it up. I looked up at that. Hyman has an earlier source, and the earlier source does not think there are multiple kahanas. I think the Gemara says kahana left and right, and doesn't ever suggest to you that there are two kahanas. Right, one of whom is Rav's adopted son. One of whom is one of whom is friendly with Rav. Like you can build whole biographies. It seems to be much easier to believe that there's only one Rav Kahana, and he has a consistent relationship with Rav, and all the stories are there, and you can work out for yourself exactly when each story happened, and whether it was a coin or not, which is also an issue. Okay. So we have our options. The option which seems to be best in the story is a girsa issue. If you go back to page 1, so if you go back to page 1, you'll see that there is a manuscript which I put in, and it says, the third line from the bottom, Ho'il v'chalaf sha'ata lo matzina. Okay, the girsa we have is lo azilna, I won't go. But lo matzina means I am not able. So the girsa there says that Rav Chia is not saying I'm going to go home. I'm going to go home, and he's not saying I have no interest in coming back to life. What he says is I can't leave unless you have some miraculous powers you have not displayed, because you have not displayed the miraculous powers so far. Because dying is something anybody can do. Right? You ask the snake to let you in, and right, guess what? Death does not exclude anybody. Right? You got into my grave, okay, because you earned it. But you haven't, right? You haven't shown anything. You haven't shown any miracles yet. So I think that probably the most plausible way of reading the end of the story is that Rav Kana says, "I'd love to come with you, but I can't." In which case, this is the end of the story of Rav Kana because he dies, and Rabbi Yochanan's Torah for the rest of his life is Torah from the grave. Right, because Rabbi Yochanan is repeating things that he learned that he learned from Rav Kana in the grave, and that he could take the Torah out, but he could not take Rav Kana out with him. Okay, and then so that's interesting. Right, that would be a very different read of where the whole story ends, and then it fits that, right? What Rabbi Yochanan says to everybody is that, right, that which I'm saying to you, really comes from them. Which is from the dead. It does not explain the Shabbat Torah in Sukkot. I don't have a good way of explaining the Shabbat Torah in Sukkot. Okay, that's the progress I have. Right, which is by no means a comprehensive thing. So I want to try one more thing, and maybe next year I'll have like Pshat Masugya. I want to try one more thing to open it up, to try and see if we have a way of understanding the relationship between Rav Kahana and Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. So there is a Gemara in Brachos, Daf Samach Bet, where Rabbi Akiva says, once upon a time, I followed Rabbi Yeshua into the bathroom. And I followed Rabbi Yeshua into the bathroom, and I learned these, three halachas from him. Okay, they're all three bathroom halachas. Ben Azai says to Rabbi Akiva, Ad kan hayasta panecha barabcha? What kind of chutzpah is that, to follow your Rabbi into the bathroom? Amar le Torah he live on a Torah. So he says, it's Torah, gotta learn Torah. Okay.
Do you know what sort of bath they had back then? Was it like a bathroom or was it like a stall?
One presumes that it was an unlockable bathroom.
Right, because in Cumming, there's a bathroom that does lock in. That's something very honorable.
Yeah, so I would presume it is, at least a two-seater. And he was in, but there's obviously a breach of normal norms to be observing somebody else's behavior in the bathroom. Yeah. And one understands why Ben Azai is so upset about this. Except the next story is Tanya Ben Azai Omer, and the exact same story happens. And Rabbi Yehuda says to him, "What? What kind of chutzpah is that?" And he says, "Sorry, sorry." So, how you deal with these two stories is a little interesting. It's very tempting. Well, which one happened first? Right? The Achronim all spend time figuring out which one happened first. But they both happened, right? So which one happened first is not, to my mind, the big issue. It's very tempting to point out that in Xavier in Munich, it only happens once. So it's very tempting to say, oh, right, and they lied Ben Azai's role entirely, and it's just Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda. And this is all really, really tempting, except that the story appears exactly the same way in the Yerushalmi. Both versions.
I mean, clearly, Rabbi Akiva thought that it was okay for people to do this.
Yeah, but he learns the same things. He learns the same thing, but the Yerushalmi doesn't pretend otherwise. If you take a look at the Yerushalmi is on page 7, right? Say there is Yerushalmi is Amar Rabbi Akiva Nichnasti Achar Rabbi Yeshua, and Af Shimon Ben Azai Omer Kain Nichnasti Achar Rabbi Akiva Lo T'Masa Amar Lo Marisa V'Chulei. Right. So whoever the Yerushalmi makes it clear that the two stories are identical. Okay, right. So if you have a cynical turn of mind, you think that one of the stories is deliberately making fun of the other, right? But where Ben Azai said, "Oh, Akiva, you said this is fine. Well, I'll go do it then too." And then it's just a cycle. Rabbi Yehuda does the same thing. Rabbi Yehuda says to Ben Azai, gives the answer Rabbi Akiva gave him, right? But all this is making fun of it. It's very tempting to read the story, though. It's very tempting, but there's no evidence whatsoever, and nobody, so far as I can tell, has ever read the story that way, where the second story is a satire on the first. I mean, I'm sure that if Daniel Yarn has an article on this, you read it this way, but it's really, the first temptation is to say that there must be a confusion as to who the story happened to, but they exist in the Yerushalmi as is, so really, really hard. Okay, the possibility that is very, very attractive is suggested by Rabbi Avraham Kurman in his book Pianuach Haggadot, which I highly recommend. Wonderful, wonderful sefer. And he says, well, he has a general theory that Rabbi Akiva, although he was head of the Bar Kokhba fundraising thing, which is itself very controversial among historians, let's take that as a given. Rabbi Akiva is that, and then he says that the Romans never find out. And he has also really interesting evidence that the Romans never find out that Rabbi Akiva is in charge, which means Rabbi Akiva must have lots of secret meetings. But how do you have secret meetings? So you have secret meetings, of course, in the bathroom, and your meetings will be with your Rebbe. The meetings will be with your student. And in case anyone is suspicious, what are you doing? Why? Right? Why do you go after the bathroom? Right. So Torah becomes an excuse, right, for having secret Bar Kokhba meetings. So that is also another way of reading the story that deprives it of all normative force, shall we say? Makes it a bad precedent for claiming that learning Torah legitimates breaches of privacy. However, there's a third story. The third story is as follows: Rav Kahana, al gan to say prayer to Rav. So Rav Kahana went up and he lay down underneath Rav's bed. Shameh the sachak asa Rachav, and he hears Rav engaging in intimate behavior with his wife. How intimate? Yeah, Asatz Rachav is pretty darn graphic.
Mhm.
It's a euphemism for graphic stuff.
Yeah, that means it's not graphic.
Yeah, okay, wait. Yeah, okay, fine. My euphemism about the euphemism is, and so that's all fine. Amrle, and Rav Kana speaks up, and he says, "Dame pumi de Abba lo sarif tavshila." Right, Abba is Rav's name, right? Rav is really named Abba Arichta, and so the mouth of Rebbe sounds like somebody who has, I don't really. It's apparently sarif means to eat. Right? He says, "You sound ravenous." That's what he says. Amrlo, Kana, Hakaat, Kana, are you here? Puk delav orachara. Get out, because this is not derech eretz. Yeah. Amrlo, Torahiv, Libladi Sarech. So now, what kind of relationship is it in which a student hides under the teacher's bed and doesn't even have like? So like, many people point out it's one thing to say Torahiv, Libladi Sarech, but why does he have to ask the question? Right? What kind of statement does a Rebbe sound like? Right? That's really way beyond. Way beyond just Torah when you start having conversations and inserting comments.
Also, it's very odd that we don't get like Rob's wife's commentary.
We don't get Rav's wife's commentary. That is true.
He also addresses Rav by his first name. Is that unusual?
Yeah, he does also address Rav. So Rav addresses him by first name also, but that's an interesting question. I don't know whether he ever refers to Rav by first name otherwise. So what do we do with this story, which seems to suggest a very particular kind of relationship between Rav and Rav Kahana? So I watched it on the Steinzel Center. They have an Israeli comedian teaching this, teaching this sugya. Also politician, it's not no contradiction, in which he argues that this is like the standard format of a joke is you tell the same, he does it with Jew, Muslim, Christian jokes, right? You tell a story, the same thing happens in the first one, the same thing happens in the second one, and the third one is the outrageous one. So he wants to read it this way, right? That the first two are just straight stories, and the third one is like if you think you Torah Hiblim Anitzara, let's see how far we can take Torah Hiblim Anitzara. Okay. Yeah, I don't think the formal argument works terribly well.
Also, like as opposed to the first two, it's not clear that he actually.
Right, it's not clear we learned it. So okay, so there is on page 6, the Derech Pikudecha gives you a long explanation of what it is that Rav learned from this conversation, and the answer is that he knew that there was a halacha that one is supposed to engage in verbal intimacy before you engage in physical intimacy, but he wasn't sure whether the halacha only applied if your wife was upset with you previously. Now, there's another Gemara, which we're running out of time. There's a Gemara in which it turns out that Rav's wife was often angry with him.
Oh yeah,
right, because she would always cook the opposite of what Rav wanted, and then Rav Chia figured it out. He would always ask for the opposite of what he wanted. To which Rav says to Chia, he says, "It seems like your mother has improved." And then Chia explains the trick to him, and Rav says, "No, you can't do that." Are we at Marav already? Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Any case, so we get perhaps at some other point we'll figure this out. It turns out there are many things you can connect to the dialogue, to the conversation between Rav and his wife. Rav is also the one who says you should never marry a woman you haven't seen before you're married, because that could lead to issues, and he would have a violation of the Haftal Reacha Kamocha. Rav also says Umatzani Mar Mimavet is et Haisha. There are all sorts of fun conversations you can have, and maybe Rav Kana and Rav had a very, very interesting relationship. There's also a Gemara in which Rav Kana thinks that Rav has cursed him. And then Rav has to explain, I didn't really mean that by the pasuk. So the same relationship Rav has with Rav Kana, Rav Yochanan has with Rav Kana. Okay, but we are hitting Mincha, so perhaps we'll have to be a part 5. Thank you all. Thank you for listening. All right. Got to keep wanting more, I guess.